Okay, so this is John Polikis. I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Why don't you introduce us and get us rolling?
Great, thanks, John. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming on the seminar. It is with great excitement that we're announcing our alliance with ITTI, the IT Transformation Institute. We've got Charlie on the seminar to talk about what ITTI is all about and how they think that the IT world is going through a major step change. A recently published very interesting book, The Quantum Age of IT. So I see many opportunities for the consulting practices that we're building within the network to be able to link up with ITTI and develop practices around the ever-changing world of IT. So I'm going to hand over to Charlie. I'll be happy to contribute all the way through the seminar, and we're also going to have a nice open forum session right at the end. So Charlie?
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. So I am very excited to be here and to be kind of partnering up with JLA as we kind of move forward into this. As we're going to talk about a little bit today, I think that this is one of the most interesting and exciting times, and I'll talk a little bit about what kind of opportunity I think that means from kind of the world of consulting. But what is important to know and what we're going to start with is just kind of really getting an idea of what the landscape is looking like, how things are changing, and therefore how we can find some opportunity in that. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing this presentation here. I'm hoping. And we're going to go through and just talk a little bit about what the book is about and kind of the areas I cover. And then, but really, I'm going to try to go through that pretty quickly because the real important part, the meat of this, is to understand what it means to you. As a practicing consultant working with your clients, how can you apply this and how can you understand what's happening so that you can leverage that to create opportunity for yourself and, in my opinion anyway, more importantly, to make sure that we are helping our clients in a way that actually makes sense and helps them move forward. So with that, and despite how excited I am about what is coming, I need to start with what may be perceived by some, although not others, as bad news, and that is that IT is, okay, let's see if this works. There we go. That IT is dead, at least as we know it. Now, I consider myself an IT person. I really grew up in the IT industry. And so to some degree, as I was going through this and kind of postulating this and kind of came to this, I don't even want to call it a conclusion, this realization, this was a little bit hard for me. And so I don't know which side of the table you're coming from, but certainly if you have an IT background, this can be tough to stomach. And I can tell you for a lot of folks in IT, they actually have no idea what I'm talking about. There's always been this state of change in IT organizations. It's been kind of this constantly moving thing. As I wrote the book, I actually went back and chronicled the history of the IT function. And it's interesting because there's a lot of history about technology, about how computers were first designed and created. And certainly the history of IT is intertwined with that history. But the history of the IT function itself is different. And as we went through and kind of studied that history, what you see is this constant state of change, this constant flux. And so to a large extent, folks in IT aren't really seeing what's happening. And that's because sometimes you're so far in the middle of something that you just don't know that you're in trouble. I'm not sure how well you can see this picture, but this guy that's driving, he's thinking he's having a great time. And he has no idea that his world is about to come crashing and burning down all around him. And that's really the state that IT organizations are now finding themselves in. Now, I said that not everyone is distressed about this because the truth of the matter is that customers, and so if you are dealing mostly in the non-IT space with business customers, they are kind of almost waiting for this to happen because they've been so frustrated for so long, and I'm going to talk about this in just a second, that they figure that something has got to change. And so it set up this perfect storm because despite the fact that most people in IT have no idea that IT as they know it is really dead, the truth is that we've had these three market forces that have converged on us really over about the last 10 years. And I actually forgot about this. Three market forces over the last 10 years. And as they've come, we've got this gap, right? And this gap has been caused by something called the curse of knowledge. Now, the curse of knowledge is this very simple idea that was really demonstrated and developed by a Stanford researcher in the late 80s. And it's basically this idea that when you know something, it becomes almost impossible to unknow it. And so the challenge with that is that it limits our ability to not only teach things properly, but also to discover them and to create, to express creativity, because we get limited by our own knowledge of what we know to be true until one time it's no longer true. And the internet is actually one of these things. In fact, everything we're talking about really started with the advent of the internet and with how that started changing the landscape for IT organizations. And as much as I sometimes chide people in IT for kind of having missed what's going on, the reality is most of us missed it. I remember in the late 80s, I had a good friend and client who was working in aerospace, and she had access to the internet because of her position, and so she was telling me about it. And here I had glimpsed the future. I had glimpsed what was coming, and I completely missed it. But I wasn't alone. This is actually a clip from 1994 from the Today Show, and it's kind of hilarious. I'll let it play for just a second.
At 56 Fest, I wasn't prepared to translate that. As opposed to that little T. That little mark with the A and then the ring around it. At? See, that's what I said. Kay said she thought it was about. Yeah. Oh. But I've never heard it. I've never heard it said. So I said mark, but never heard it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. I was at NBC. Yeah, I heard you around there about the lecture.
So apparently this was supposed to be an off-camera thing. I'm not entirely sure if that's true, but the point of this is still in the early days. Now, the internet had been around for a few years at this point, but it was shifting the paradigm so much that people just didn't even have a frame of reference for it. And that really set us on this stage, and I think it's the issue that we have, that most people, really on both sides of the aisle, I'm speaking in Amsterdam next week to a group of business people, really about the same subject, but kind of from the other perspective. And the reality is that people on both sides of this equation just don't have a good handle that everything we are looking at is changing, that the ground is literally shifting beneath our feet. And it's because of these three market forces that have really developed over the last 10 years that I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about, because the very first thing we have to recognize, or that you have to believe, is that we are at this point where there's this fundamental shift in the operating paradigm of the IT organization, and that's going to change everything in terms of how we as IT organizations operate and as how our customers consume those services. So regardless of which side, or maybe you're working on both sides, this is going to change that relationship. So the very first market force that kind of came to bear here was what is now commonly called the consumerization of IT. It began really, in my opinion, with the advent of Google, although you could certainly argue it started a little bit before that. But when Google came onto the scene, it really changed everything, because suddenly we could search for anything, and the information that we wanted was available at our fingertips. And as it became mobile and on iPhones and on Androids and whatever else, I mean, literally, wherever we were, we had every piece of information available to us at our fingertips. And in fact, I would argue that over those last 10 years, this access to information has almost become a new human right. It's kind of like been ingrained. And while many of us in IT or technology were kind of enjoying this and kind of experimenting and playing with it, well, guess what? So were our customers. And they were getting increasingly frustrated, because on the one hand, they had access to all of this information, but when they came into the office, that information was much, much harder to come by. And then came along Facebook and other social media type applications and technologies and platforms. And the same thing started happening, because now suddenly they had the ability to, we call it social, but it's really about collaboration. They had the ability to share what they were doing or plan vacations. My last high school reunion was planned on Facebook. And again, they see this level of interaction and how simple and easy it is. And they come into the office, and it's nowhere near the same kind of an experience. And then finally we have Apple, who introduced first the iPhone and then the iPad. And they completely changed the way that we expect to interact with our technology, the way it should feel to us, how it should make us feel, and what that experience should be like. And so we talk about consumerization. Sometimes people bring the concept of BYOD, or bring your own device, and all this, that this is a real big ground shake. Well, I think that really the big impact of the consumerization of IT was that it subtly but consistently changed the perception of how technology should work, of what the customer experience should be like when our customers are interacting with us as IT professionals. And so I think that as this perception shifted, the dissatisfaction that IT's customers had with IT became very, very strong. It kind of started really breaking apart. And that was really just this level of frustration as a starting point. But at the same time, something else was happening. And that is the criticality of IT completely changed. So when I started in the business, in IT, I really came from a healthcare industry. And one of my first, well, not one of my first positions, but at one point I joined a healthcare organization, and I went into one of the hospitals that was kind of under my control, and I was responsible for all technical operations. And I walked into the admitting department where they admit patients to the hospital, and sitting next to each terminals, and yes, I know I'm dating myself with the terminals, but sitting next to each terminal was a stack of downtime forms. And frankly, a lot of people in IT don't even know what a downtime form is anymore. They're still used in healthcare, but basically it's simply that form that is used to handwrite patient information if the systems are unavailable for whatever reason, so the business process can continue. So it wasn't unusual that downtime forms existed, but I asked the admitting manager, why are they sitting out? And she gave me a very simple answer. Well, our systems fail 4 to 5 times a day. There seems no point in putting them away. And that wasn't really a great answer for me as the person whose problem this now was. But it illustrates a point. She wasn't really upset. I mean, she was a little frustrated. She was certainly hopeful that I was going to fix that in some way. But the reality was that when systems failed, life went on. Business continued. There was no real dramatic impact. Maybe things took a little longer, maybe they were a little less efficient, maybe it cost a little bit more money. But the business continued. But see, over the last 10 years, that changed. Really with the onset of the dot-com era and this idea of technology entering the mainstream, really in the mainstream, that complete paradigm shifted, because now technology is used really to power every single business process in the enterprise. And in fact, virtually every element of the customer transaction and of the customer experience in most cases is powered in some way by technology. And so when our systems fail today in the enterprise, the results are catastrophic. I mean, in the case of healthcare, it literally can affect life and death situations. And in the case of things like finance, it's often measured in millions of dollars per minute, or sometimes even seconds. And so the impact of systems and technology on the enterprise and on the business of doing business is now so enormous that we've created a very difficult situation for our customers. They are now, because at the same time, by the way, the complexity of those systems has continued to elevate, continued to grow more and more complex. And so our customers are sitting out there, and they are deathly afraid, because they are relying for their very livelihood on systems that they do not understand, that are being run by people they frankly do not trust. So the second kind of element of the perfect storm was that as that criticality happened, so we had the consumerization and now the criticality, and it was just creating this situation that was ready to burst. But frankly, it probably could have stayed there forever, because these underlying tensions have been around for a long time, until the third market force hit. And that is really cloud, or software as a service, call it what you want. But basically, it's really about competition. That over the last few years, there's been an entire rash of organizations that have entered the market that are now providing specialized services to IT's customers, to the business enterprise, that really up until just a few years ago could only be provided by internal IT. So suddenly, we now have a situation where there are hundreds, and literally more entering every day, of companies that are coming in and are competing with the IT organization. And I believe that that has introduced this third element of the perfect storm, because the reality, or the truth, is that companies are leaving in droves. They're taking their business, if you will, from IT and moving into these providers, sometimes with the help of IT, but a lot of times completely outside the purview of IT. IT finds out after the fact. And it has just put us down this path that I believe that when you put all those things together, it is that perfect storm, that when you combine the consumerization, the criticality, and the competition, that it simply means that the way IT has done business for the last 45 years has come to an end. It cannot continue in this fashion. And I think that that brings with it a couple of realizations. The first is that IT organizations are going to go through a massive transition, because really for the last 45 years, we've been manufacturers of technology. We've been the people that produced it for our enterprise. And that we were basically the sole source provider of technology for them. So we may have bought an IBM or a DEC or whatever our major computing platform was, but I'm old enough to remember literally soldering wires together to make some of that stuff work. We certainly assembled huge chunks of our infrastructure, and we certainly wrote a whole lot of the code that was used to run the business of our, the IT business for our enterprise. And so that's really where we've come from, and as a consequence, we've structured our entire IT organization around that model. And that made sense. But see, as these three elements, these three market forces have changed the paradigm, it changed something else very, very important. Our customers, IT's customers, no longer look at IT in that way. I'm not sure if they ever really did, but that's the services we are providing. But thanks to experiences with Apple, the Apple Store, and all the other stuff we've been talking about, the fundamental perception of how they should interact with the IT organization, with the providers of technology services, has changed. And in their minds, we have gone from being manufacturers to retailers. And the truth is that this isn't even just a perception, it's also a reality. Because in most IT organizations, we really don't build technology anymore. We buy almost everything off the shelf, including all the software. And we certainly do configuration, but in a lot of organizations, we're even seeing mantras come around that says, no customization at all. Take this thing off the shelf. And it's this idea of the commoditization of the technology platform. But so as we make this shift from a manufacturer to a retailer, IT organizations have to come to terms with the fact that this brings with it some skill sets that simply do not exist in the IT organization in most cases today. Things like supply chain management, merchandising, customer experience management, things that the IT organization just doesn't really contemplate. And you can see the conflict that this creates, because our customers are coming to us and expecting an experience like walking into an Apple store. And instead, we give them a manufacturing plant. And so IT should not at all be surprised that that customer experience is not a good one, and that the customers, their customers, are really begging for other options. But as we make this transition into retail IT, it brings with it something else. This recognition that there's not a single IT provider in the world, even Walmart, although they are getting close, that can provide you every single retail good that you would ever want. And so if we think about that, retailer organizations, in order to survive, must specialize. They have a very specific market segment that they service, and they deliver to them a very specific value proposition. They don't try to be all things to all people, because they know that's a recipe for disaster. And so they focus. It could be that they're a high-end fashion retailer, or they're a baby store, or they're a grocery store, whatever it is, they are providing some very specific market value to a very specific market segment. IT organizations are going to have to make this same transition. And part of that, or the very first step of that, is recognizing that the era of IT being the sole source provider of technology into the enterprise is dead. It's over. And that means it's going to bring with it a whole new approach in how we interact with our customers. And I call it being either a strategic sourcer or being a strategic innovator, recognizing that not all organizations out there get the value from their IT investments the same way. That some are looking for the Walmart experience, they're looking for that low-cost provider that's all about efficiency and supply chain, but they're not really looking for competitive advantage at a customer level from their IT spend. On the other hand, you then have those organizations that they're looking for that Nordstrom experience, that high-touch, high-feel. It's really about, the cost is always going to be in play, it's always important, but they're looking for IT to be the power, the engine that powers innovation and powers strategic and competitive advantage for their customers. So as we look at this, we start seeing that this really starts breaking down into a couple of different things, and we start seeing that the IT organization becomes something different than what it was. In fact, it becomes what I call a quantum IT organization. And the quantum IT organization, here's what quantum means. The reason the term came about is quantum kind of commonly means this idea of explosive. We talk about quantum change and this big explosive effort or whatever. But from a physics standpoint, quantum is the smallest form of something that can maintain its characteristics. So in my butchered conversion here or translation, it's the most optimal form of something. And I believe that's what the IT organization of the future must look like. It must be this organization that is just enough, that is not trying to be all things to all people, that it is doing just what it must do to deliver strategic value to the organization, and by doing that, creating the explosive application of technology to solve real business problems. And so as we think through what that means, as we make this transition from a manufacturer to a retailer, then the IT organization must come to embody 5 organizational traits, and IT professionals must come to develop 5 professional skills that will help lead us forward. And this is where I think the opportunity comes for you guys as consultants and as practice leaders to help organizations go through this process. And by the way, it's a double-edged sword, because I think most of this does in fact fall in the IT organization. But the reality is also that IT organizations have spent the last 45 years training their customers how to interact with them. So there's going to be a mindset shift that also occurs on the business side of the equation to make sure that this relationship can actually transform itself. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So with that, the 5 organizational traits, and I'm going to try to get through these relatively quickly, but there's a lot to them. The first thing to recognize as you see these pop up on the screen is that these traits are not IT traits. They're not technology traits. The best way to describe these are probably that these are business traits. That this is about what does the IT organization need to do to become more of a business organization. And the very first part of that is that IT organizations need to become learning organizations. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that term. It doesn't mean that they have really good educational practices, although that's certainly a part of it. But this term comes from a book called The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. And it really talks about organizations that put systems in place, and not technical, not IT systems, but systems in place that allow the organization to continually adapt, continually learn and change. And it's really about becoming an organization that is comfortable living in a continuous state of change, because that's really what is coming. I mean, I would argue that's where we've been, but IT organizations have been just really horrible about change. We don't want to change. We are frankly happy with the way things have always been. And it's interesting, as I studied the history of IT organizations, what was fascinating is that while technology has changed dramatically, the function of IT has almost not changed at all. And so this is the very first thing that IT organizations are going to have to embrace, is this idea that we are living in a state of continual change, and that we need to build organizations that are in a state of continual change with that. They're continually adapting. Now, an example of this that I love to tout is the Ritz-Carlton. Most people know the Ritz-Carlton high-end hotel hospitality chain. And a lot of people also know that they have a very unique kind of practice, and that is that every single employee of the organization, all the way down to their housekeepers, are empowered to spend, I always forget the exact amount, I think it's $5,000. It's a lot, you can fact check me in the book, but a large amount of money to make a customer happy, to solve a customer's problem, really to protect the customer experience. And they're often touted for this policy, and it's used as an example of what good customer service looks like. And that's all true, and it's great. But there's one other thing that you don't hear about nearly as often, and that is that once that housekeeper or whomever does whatever they've got to do to make the customer happy to solve that problem, they're not done. There's an entire system, an IT system that runs in the back end that they have to then go and record that action. What happened, what caused the displeasure with the customer, what they did to solve it, how much it cost, and what they think those lessons learned are. And that gets crunched through this big giant analytics system that is really fed into this process so that the organization as a whole can continue to learn from those situations. And what's interesting about it is it's not just about the customer experience, it's also about cost. I mean, they're doing this for both reasons, right? They don't want to spend that money again. They want to make sure that that problem doesn't recur so that they don't have to go and out of pocket or unexpectedly spend this large amount of money. But at the same time, they're protecting the customer experience. And it's a great example that when we do this right, it actually brings these two things together and aligns our goals with the needs and goals of our customer. The second trait is that IT organizations are going to have to become highly disciplined. Now, there's been a lot of efforts made in many IT organizations around this space. We come from I guess I come from a service management and ITIL type background, but whether it's ITIL or COBIT or Six Sigma, pick your flavor of the month, the IT organizations have been on this road for the last 10 to 15 years about trying to instill discipline and rigor into the organization. Now that's great, but a lot of them have not done a great job at it because they've come at it from the wrong point of view. That we want to put in the level of discipline and rigor to the point that we're able to meet the promise that we make to our customers. And that's the limit of what we should be doing. And in many cases, we end up doing it for the sake of discipline or for the sake of process. And what we end up creating is not value, but bureaucracy. And so we have to understand what the real point of it is, that when we're looking at building discipline, it's about building trust with our customer. So it forms the foundation of trust because it gives us the right to have the rest of this conversation. And as I'm talking through this, I hope you're starting to see the points that, and we're going to talk about them a little bit more in a minute, but the points at which there's so much opportunity for you as a consultant to come alongside both IT organizations and the business side of the house as these things have to get developed. The third trait that's going to have to get created or get developed in IT organizations is transparency. Now, in order for an IT organization to become transparent, the first thing is to understand what that means. It means being unabashedly open about both operational and financial, the operational financial situation. But here's what it doesn't mean, and this is what a lot of IT organizations do. It doesn't mean just throwing up all over the customer and just saying, here's everything, I'm going to spill my guts here, it's all in the technical mumbo-jumbo, in the hopes that if I confuse you enough, you're just going to give me what I want. Now, I don't believe that most IT organizations and most IT leaders are trying to pull the wool over the eyes of their customers. They frankly just don't have the desire to have this big conversation that they feel that their customer is not going to understand. And so we've created this kind of really bad scenario where neither side wants to really talk about what's really on the table. And that's what needs to get fixed. But what we have to understand is that when we talk about transparency, what we're really talking about is choice. So I live in Southern California, and when I moved to Corona del Mar, where I live now, one of the first things I did is find a mechanic. California, we live by our cars, and having a good mechanic is one of the most important things. And so I was very fortunate. I found Marcus. When I told Marcus that I put him in the book, he kind of got a big kick out of it. But the reason he's in it is that Marcus kind of typifies the relationship and the experience when it comes to transparency that I think we should be seeking to create in the relationship between IT and the business, or IT and its customers. And that is that when I go to Marcus and bring my car in for whatever it is, I know that I'm going to get three things. The first thing is that I'm going to get an objective state or an objective telling of what's going on. He's going to just simply tell me, I looked at the car and this is what I found. And then he's going to give me options. He's going to give me choices. He's going to say, here are your choices. The choices may be simply do something, do nothing. Choices may be, you can go this route and fix it partially. You can do this full rebuild. You can do whatever. But with each choice, I know I'm going to get the pros and the cons, the risks and the benefits. And then the third thing I'm going to get is a question. What do you want to do? What's best for you? And that sounds so simple, but how many of us have had experience going to mechanics where what we get is no choice? They open up the hood, they find out all the stuff that we don't understand, or at least I don't understand because I'm not good with cars, and they try to sell us a bill of goods. And even if they aren't trying to sell us a bill of goods, because that's what they're giving us, they're simply telling us that this is what you need to do, that we feel that may be what we're getting. That is the relationship that most IT organizations have with their customers. And it engenders this complete distrust because it just confuses people. And so when we talk about transparency, IT organizations are going to have to get very comfortable with the fact that we're having this business conversation, and we need to have those choice, by the way, that choice is in business terms, of exactly what it is that we are doing for our customer and how they can react to that. And that leads us to the fourth trait, which is intimacy. And this actually comes from a lot of years of marketing research in the area of customer intimacy. And it's something that is so foreign to most IT organizations, and it's probably the biggest stretch of all of these. Because it basically means that IT has to get out of our comfort zone. We have to step beyond our walls and actually live our lives and the lives of our customers. Bill Ray, who's the CIO of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Rhode Island, or actually he was when I interviewed him for the book, he's now the COO, he got promoted. He gave me this line when I interviewed him. He said that I tell my folks that they cannot expect to go 50% of the way and expect the customer to come the other 50% of the way. That they have to go 80% of the way. He called it the intimacy line. That they had to go out and live in their customer's world and let the customer come the last 20% of the way to them so that they could actually form a meaningful relationship. And here's what it means. It means that we as IT organizations have to get beyond this concept of requirements and SLAs, or service level agreements, as the foundation of our relationship. We have to get to the point where we are actually having business conversations about what our customers are caring about, what their problems are, and that we are the ones that are bringing technology solutions to bear, not asking them to tell us what it is that we need. And so this is a pretty fundamental shift in how we view it, how we approach it, and it means a lot of education and a lot of learning about the real business. It is still shocking to me how many times I go into IT organizations, especially at the non-executive level, and the folks there literally have no idea what business the enterprise is in, of how all the technology they're running actually does anything for the organization. And the fifth trait is that organizations must become dynamic organizations, and this is really kind of a super trait. It really means taking that as we've built these other four traits underneath it, that we can now create a sum that is greater than the sum of its parts. And so that outcome basically means we can take and create exponential value. Because we've become this highly adaptable organization that is learning constantly, because we have the discipline and rigor to execute consistently, because we have the transparency to give our customers business-driven choice, and the intimacy to even have that conversation to begin with and to understand where the business is going and how technology can be leveraged to create value, potentially even before our customers do, then we become this highly dynamic organization, one that is incredibly agile, incredibly flexible, and is able to help our customers react to the market changes that are coming. Because the truth is that they desperately want this. They desperately need this. And there's often talk, and I'm probably going to take this one out of order, but there's often talk in IT circles that, the business, customer, they don't understand us. They hate us. They don't get it. The message I have for IT organizations all the time is that there's no greater fan than we have than our customers. They desperately want us to succeed. They are pulling for us. Because if we fail at this as IT organizations, then everybody loses. So embodying these 5 traits puts the IT organization on a path of relevancy. As Dave mentioned, we run a group called the IT Transformation Institute. And so we spend a lot of time talking about organizational transformation, cultural change, organizational transformation. But there's a little myth in this. And the myth is that there's no such thing as organizational transformation. There's only personal transformation multiplied across an organization that then manifests itself as organizational transformation. And so while these organizational traits that I just went through are vitally important and are exactly what must be developed in order for this to work, the truth is that we can only do this if the IT professionals within the organization begin that process by making that change first. And so IT professionals have 5 skills that they're going to have to learn and develop.
Hey, Charlie.
Yes.
Before we go on, I'd like to unmute the lines and see if there are any questions out there.
Sure.
Okay, so everyone should be unmuted now. If you have any questions, please speak up.
Okay, it's Paul Wainwright here in Hamilton. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
So what you're saying is that big IT departments are going to disappear, and there's going to be a bunch of freelancers. And those freelancers will be absorbed by the consulting company as experts. That's my take.
Interesting. Actually, no, I don't believe that, at least not entirely. So I do think that there are going to be large chunks of what is presently considered IT that are going to move outside the walls of the enterprise. I don't believe, save the largest 50 to 100 companies in the world maybe, that any IT organization is going to own and operate its own infrastructure in the future. But what I do think happens is that it's become much smaller but much more highly focused. So here, the corollary to this is that technology does not become less important, it becomes more important. And so it's really a question, if you look at the average IT organization, if we looked at it as lines of business, typically it's measured in hundreds of lines of business. And so the real issue is we're going to dump all those. We're going to dump all these non-strategic, non-critical, non-core lines of business and get rid of them, and instead focus on only those lines of business that we are uniquely positioned to provide value to the IT organization. And so that's what I think it looks like. One quick example of that, and I guess I didn't mention it, I'm not sure if it's in here, but one of the CIOs interviewed this guy by the name of Joe Pleasant. He's a CIO at a company called Superior, I always forget the name of it, but they're the biggest company no one's ever heard of, as evidenced by the fact that I can't remember the name right now. They're publicly held, but most of their shares are owned by their customers. They're really a consortium of several hundred hospitals around the country. And so every year he makes a presentation to his executive team, which is made up of representatives from all of these customers, which are also shareholders, and basically does a market analysis, takes every service that the IT organization provides and compares it to what's available in the marketplace and demonstrates how they provide value. But part of that is also then they have the courage to say, you know what, we looked at this, and basically they're providing this better in the market than we can provide, and we don't believe it's strategic enough for us to build that competency. So we're going to exit this line of business. We are no longer going to provide the service, and instead we will be bringing these guys in and let them provide it for you. And so that is, I think, the model that starts evolving as this goes forward. So did that answer your question, or was there, I mean, I think it's a good observation. I think that there, and this representation, I think, the major change that's going on, but is there a follow-on question there?
Oh, sure. The follow-up is that I guess if we go to fix, in my case, I'm working on some hospitals, one of the first things that we should be fixing is their IT department. And this is funny because the girl I'm dating is an IT chick at a major hospital. And all I hear of is big problems and no communications, and they're in a small little cave trying to serve 7 different hospitals. So what you're saying is that perhaps that's one area we should sell ourselves to in big organizations, fixing their IT.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think that the big message here is twofold. One is that IT is a huge part of this problem. IT has to heal itself. IT has to come to this with just complete humility and say, this is all changing and we have to lead this change. My message when I'm talking to IT executives is that you really only have 2 choices in front of you: to either lead this change or to have this change happen to you. The counterpoint to, not even the counterpoint, but the other side of that, though, is that if we allow this change to happen, meaning if the IT organization does not step up and lead it, not only does the IT organization lose, but so does that organization. Because if we end up, I mean, here's the downside. I'm a huge fan of software as a service, cloud services, whatever you want to call it. I think they are great for a huge chunk of what most businesses need to consume from an IT perspective. But if we as an organization run our entire business on homogenized technology, then we have no way to leverage technology to create competitive advantage, because the reality is that technology is the single greatest engine for competitive advantage in an organization today. And so if IT fails at this process, if we do not fix IT, everyone loses. Those businesses that do not fix this within their organization and keep some strategic component, they're going to get washed away. And I believe this is actually very true in healthcare. We can talk about that later. Like I said, I come from healthcare, so I have some very strong opinions about what healthcare IT needs to be doing around that. But yeah, I think that there's definitely an opportunity to not only work with IT, but to work with IT not in a vacuum. And so if you're coming from a business perspective, to be able to help bridge that gap and to serve as the group and the organization that helps bring this together, because it's going to be like fixing a marriage that's on the verge of divorce, frankly.
Well, it's true, because it seems to me that IT gets blamed for everything, and then it seems to be more pressure in IT than any other department, and then they have to do a lot of personal health and well-being counseling, because all of these people drinking and doing drugs. And an interesting case is they have such a bad boss that one guy left, started his own IT consulting company, and bit by bit is stealing his old coworkers. So I could see a company like that, once they've got everybody stolen, going back to the health system and saying, okay, we've got all the knowledge now, we can fix you.
Right. And unfortunately, it's funny. Actually, just earlier this week, I conducted a workshop for a software startup. Again, same idea. How do you understand what's going on in the industry and apply it to their business? And so we were helping them develop a product strategy going forward. And what was fascinating is that they are just as subject to this. They are just as liable to fall into the same traps if they don't see what's happening. Except it's going to happen much faster for them. And so, in that scenario that you just pointed out, simply coming back and now being on the outside, while that will, just because they're going to learn some things, it will change a little bit, they still have to understand how the dynamics are changing and to be able to approach that properly. So I'll tell you, in fact, I think what you're just talking about there actually leads into these 5 skills, because these 5 skills are really the skills that the IT professionals are going to have to develop. And I'll go through this very quickly, but to be able to have that relationship. And then I think I do have a slide here that kind of talks about where I think the greatest opportunities are, and hopefully we can have a little bit more discussion about that.
So
I'm not going to spend much.
At this point, I'm going to, unless there's something else at this point, I'll mute the mic and we'll let Charlie go through the 5 traits and the opportunity slide.
Yeah, I'll go through this pretty quick. So these 5 skills, just like the traits, are really business skills. There's not a technology skill amongst them or a technical skill. The first is financial, and if you guys are coming from a business perspective, this is like a no-brainer, but it is so foreign to most people in IT, it's bordering on humorous if it wasn't so scary. But IT people really do not know how to speak the language of finance, and they need to. I was meeting with I was brought in to speak at a leadership meeting for a management consulting firm based on the East Coast, and so I had kind of all of their senior consultants and senior practice leaders in the room, and they started laughing, and they said, these 5 skills are exactly what we do. This is really why someone brings us into an IT organization, because they don't have any of these skills. And so when we talk about financial, IT organizations have to learn how to put everything that they do in a business context using business-driven metrics. Whether that's improving revenue, improving market share, shareholder value, return on equity, we've got to have everything that we do all the way down to a network upgrade done into these or put into these financial business terms. And it's something that IT organizations and IT professionals are just horrible at. And so, but until we do that, my argument to IT organizations, it's like we are living in a different country from our customer, and we haven't bothered to learn their language. And so then we are surprised that we provide them a poor customer experience and that we can't develop products that they actually want and need. Well, it's because we can't communicate with them. So we've got to learn to speak the language of business. The second is critical thinking. IT organizations have fallen, because of all the stress and pressure we were just talking about, have fallen into what I call the best practice trap. This idea that we go adopt best practices, whether those are process best practices like the ITIL and COBIT frameworks, or they're technology best practices like agile deployments, whatever, and they're all great, but we stop thinking. And what we have to realize is that our organizations, the business is paying IT not to simply copy what everyone else is doing, but to find those things and to apply their education expertise to find ways to leverage value for the benefit of the organization. So we've got to reinvigorate those critical thinking skills in IT. The third is marketing and communication. IT people think that their work should speak for themselves, and it doesn't. So we've got to help them learn that they've got to market what they're doing. One of my great frustrations is, frankly, in a lot of IT organizations, they're actually doing a lot of really good things, but nobody knows it, because they don't know how to do this. They do not know how to communicate in business terms, communicate in terms of the value they provide to their customers, and they need to do this because as competition gets introduced, suddenly, guess what? That competition is speaking that language. They are talking, and they are marketing, and they are communicating in terms that their customers, IT's customers, who they're now competing with, in those terms, in the language that they want to speak. And so if IT doesn't learn these skills, then we will forever remain marginalized. The fourth one is innovation and collaboration. Now, I just do want to speak about this for one quick second, because again, from a consulting opportunity, this may be one of the bigger ones. That when we talk about innovation, the reality is that with all this transition, technology innovation is not going to occur within the walls of the enterprise. It just doesn't make any sense. It's going to happen out in the software startups and in all the different technology players out there. That's where technology innovation is going to occur. But Procter & Gamble is widely regarded as one of the most innovative companies in the world. And yet, if you look at their products are all highly commoditized. They sell laundry detergent and soap and food products. But they're regarded as highly innovative because of their business process innovation, about how they bring things to market, about how they market to begin with, all of those types of aspects. That is the opportunity for the IT organization, is that business process innovation is the great untapped resource. We've spent far too much energy in IT focusing on the technology rather than on figuring out how we leverage that technology to create innovation within business process. And so that's the great opportunity, and it is a different skill set. It's learning how to apply those same innovation principles, but on that side of things. And that means the other reason that the reason these are joined with collaboration is that in order to affect that, there's not a single innovation, in my opinion, a single business process innovation that can be powered by IT that's going to come out of a single IT silo. In order for this to work, it's going to require people that can break through those silos, build loosely formed ad hoc coalitions to solve problems. And so this skill of being able to bring people together is going to be important, which leads to the last skill, and that is just raw leadership. I think that it is probably the single greatest thing that is missing in most IT organizations is that there's just no sense of leadership. There's no sense of self-determination even. And I think that we are moving into a fast world. Our customers are getting stuff thrown at them left and right. The business world is changing. The market is changing more rapidly than ever before. And so the days of a hierarchical structure succeeding in IT are gone. And so we're still probably going to have at least a loosely hierarchical structure, but in order to work and react and to remain relevant in that world, IT professionals at every single level are going to have to see themselves as an IT leader. Even if they're leading a team of one, they're going to have to be taking the initiative to see, I see a problem, going back to this idea of a learning organization. I see a problem, I see a situation, I see something that's going on, and this is how we can go fix it. And I'm going to go assemble a team of people from across the IT organization to solve this problem without waiting for it to come down from on top or to be told or even to be asked to do it. And so those raw leadership skills of being willing to step up and step out and to break through kind of the paradigms of fear that tend to permeate IT organizations today is going to be that last really linchpin skill that IT organizations have to make. Okay, I know I'm almost out of time, but here's what this means. I think for all of you, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in this turmoil that's going to come. The next 3 to 5 years are going to see just complete chaos in a lot of ways as IT organizations have this thrust upon them. And so they're going to be desperately looking for help. And I think there's 4 specific places, and I'm just going to go through these kind of quickly so that we can have a little bit more conversation about it, but 4 specific places where I think you can come to the table and help them, especially if you have that business perspective to it. The first is understanding supply chains. As we really look at what's coming, the IT spend in the IT organization is really going to become an ecosystem. It's going to look much more like the way a Walmart or a Nordstrom's manages its delivery of products. They don't make anything, but they have to manage through a bunch of different suppliers to get products. Sometimes they're having them built for them in their own store brands. Sometimes they're assembling products or they're assembling bundles. It's the same idea, and it's an entire ecosystem. IT organizations have been very insular. They're going to need help understanding A, how supply chains work, B, how to build those ecosystems, C, how to manage those ecosystems, so that we can have a supply chain that actually functions, right? So in either case, whether they're a strategic supplier or innovator or strategic sourcer, that supply chain has to be this highly disciplined, highly rigorous process that just works. They're going to need help there. Along with that comes this idea of value creation. Right now, most IT organizations do not think in terms of how value is created for the enterprise. They think in terms of delivering a technology-based service. And so there's a big fallacy in this, or a big problem, that if we look at the way a business process runs and how that business process delivers value to the organization's customer, that we recognize that value is derived not in equal measures across the supply chain or across it. So they need to be able to look at the IT services that they're providing and understand which services and which parts of those services are in fact delivering the most value. So the first thing they need help with is being able to understand how to measure business value through the paradigm of an IT service. And then secondarily, to be able to, again, going back to supply chain, to tie that together so that we protect that. One of the big issues that IT organizations have is working with their suppliers, working with their vendor community, because they tend to treat them at arm's length and keep them at arm's length. They need to create intimacy with them to be able to pull this together, so that, because they're going to live and die, they're going to be in bed with them. And they do a really bad job of figuring that out and breaking through those barriers so that value can be protected. The third area is the customer experience. Those of you that have a marketing background, this is going to be huge. The only real area that IT organizations spend any energy in this at all is in their service desk or help desk, and even that most of the time is well, in many cases, is the worst part of the customer experience. So this whole transition from manufacturing to retail is going to bring with it these ideas of merchandising, meaning that we're actually creating products with the customer in mind, and putting in policies and processes and procedures that are geared to enhance and protect that customer experience. These are going to be very foreign concepts to them, and introducing, again, these are very tried and true practices from a marketing and business standpoint, and simply helping the IT organization understand them and introduce them. And one thing that I skipped, by the way, early on, is that as they start understanding their different value propositions, if they are a strategic innovator or a strategic sourcer, they have to recognize that that's going to lead to a change in their organizational structure, the processes, the policies they use. Because while ostensibly Walmart and Nordstrom are in the same business, because they have different customers with different value propositions, they do not hire the same kind of people, they don't train them the same way, they don't have the same return policies, they don't have the same supply chain disciplines. All of it is different because it is all honed to the specific value that they create for their customers. When we talk about customer experience, it's the same thing, and I think there's a huge opportunity for you guys to help your clients go through that process. And the last real gap that you can fill is helping them develop leadership. When I met with this other management consulting firm, I challenged them. I said, you guys do this for your clients today. But the problem is that while you're helping the business solve the problem, you're not doing anything to help build the IT organization in a way that it can actually survive and be relevant. And my belief is that by doing this, that by helping them learn these leadership skills, by coming alongside them and helping them learn from you, that you actually create a partner that will last far into the future, and it's actually going to be able to create more business for you because they're going to survive, they will be relevant, and the application of technology and how it powers business growth and business value is only going to continue. So with that, here's some of my contact information, and of course we are partnering up with JLA, so we can always, we're always accessible through that. But with that, John, if you want to open up for any other questions that either came in via chat or on the line, then we're good.
Okay, all the mics are now open, so please go ahead.
Well, I don't want to dominate, but it looks like nobody else is asking questions. It's, can you hear me?
Please go ahead.
It's interesting what you say about customer service, because I'm the guy who dates the IT chick, and their service desk is not 24 hours. So this is something that maybe we could help them with. What they do is they make the regular employees take an on-call phone. They pay them overtime. The phone will ring 24 hours a day. So you've worked your 8 to 4 shift, then you have to take this frickin' phone home and be woken up at 2 a.m. by some nurse or doctor that can't sign into their email.
Right.
And I've always said, you know, this should be an entry-level position where somebody does nothing but the overnights or whatever. Because what happens is you wake somebody up at 3 a.m., all grouchy and bitchy at you. Really bad customer service.
Exactly.
Really bad customer service. And I've got one example of how the tail doesn't know what the dog is doing. So they went through hell once because in their hospital, the overhead paging system wasn't working at all. You know, Dr. Dave Terry, pick up the blue phone. Nobody could hear any of that. Went on for 3 days. The hardware people went through all the computers, the IT programs, and it turned out some nurse turned down the volume because she thought she was turning down the radio. Nobody checked the mechanical devices. Anyway, that's all I have to contribute.
Well, you know what, and I know we have a couple other questions, so I will keep this short, but you know, you're absolutely right, and I think that understanding and helping them, and you got to remember, so part of it, here's how I view our job in this. Our job is to help stir the pot, get people to understand that this is a very real issue and that they've got to be open to change. The challenge for you guys is to help them go through that change. There's a discipline to learning that kind of approach to customer experience, to even understanding that we have to view it that way first and foremost, to have that recognition that, you know what, if we wake them up at 3 in the morning, they're probably not going to provide a good experience, right? So then what is the right approach? And so completely agree with you, and I think that's, you know, the opportunity for you. So John, what other question do we have?
Well, I saw Alan and Michael had both raised their hands. So, Alan, would you like to go ahead? Or maybe not. Michael?
Dan muted.
Yep, everyone's unmuted at this point.
Okay.
I have an interesting point of view on this, which I think really supports what you're saying, Charlie. Back about a decade ago, we did a project for an organization by the name of SITA, S-I-T-A. They're the telecommunications co-op that are owned by the by all the airlines. So LAX, for instance, is a SITA code. And interestingly enough, we did a thorough analysis of the culture of the organization, and one of the things we did in that was we actually got their customers, and they really are like an IT service group. They provide a network, they provide baggage handling systems, they provide reservation type systems, and obviously they provide the phone lines to all the desks and all the check-in points in airports. And the interesting thing with them was one of the things that we did was we got some marketing professionals in to get customers to describe how they felt about SITA against an AT&T or someone like that. And one of the questions that the lady that was doing the work asked was, we're in a boardroom, just in a nobody's boardroom. It was an on and off site. Describe SITA's boardroom to us. And people said, well, all the chairs are different. Some are leather and padded, and some are old. They're all kind of antique, but everything's different. And And well, describe AT&T's boardroom to us. Well, they're all the same. They're all leather and chrome and glass, and it's very modern and it's very up to date. And we kind of took that idea and we took CEDAR into some thoughts around agility. And actually, one of the analogies, I remember one of the CEDAR employees coming back to me that someone had used was like a fighter aircraft. A fighter aircraft is not a very stable thing if you try and fly it. The reason it's so maneuverable is its airframe isn't that stable. And to me, I got a sense that operating on that level of instability in this tremendous amount of change that we're going through is really where the IT departments need to be. And that was a goal we had for CEDAR about a decade ago. If you're going to remain competitive and keep all these legacy customers, you've got to offer them the things that other people are offering them from somewhere else.
Actually, I love that analogy. I think that's exactly one of the things that when we talk about organizational change and we go into organizations, we often say the first thing we need to introduce is a little bit of chaos, right? People have got to get comfortable with the fact that we are going to be in this state of change, and then we need to get used to that. In fact, sometimes we do it artificially just to start getting people accustomed to it. But I actually think that you bring up a really interesting point in terms of just recognizing that how this change is going. The example that I give is that we have the IT executives are being put in a really difficult position because they are. The reality is they are all stretched. I mean, this last round of the financial kind of meltdown, they were really cut to the bone. I mean, to the point that I think we got out of fat and into muscle in a lot of organizations. And so we're telling them that they're flying around in a twin prop airplane, and they need to convert into a fighter jet. They need to do it right now, and by the way, they need to do it without landing. And so they're going to need a ton of help to make that happen. But if they can pull it off, then I think there's just a great opportunity for everybody. So I'm hopeful and I'm excited to be a part of this partnership because of that.
Fantastic, great.
All right, well, with that, John, I think we're past our time, I think, or was this scheduled to go longer? Do we have time for more questions if there are any, or where are we at?
Well, I put an extra 15 minutes because I know that there could have been questions at the end. So we'll do one more check for questions, and if not, we'll close down the conference. So anyone on the line have a question?
See Michael's hand.
Well, I'm just thinking that this is one of our ends.
Yeah, I saw Michael. I saw your hand go up, but I didn't hear you. You have a microphone you're speaking through?
You can chat it.
Could you, possibly type your question, Michael?
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, John, if anyone else has any questions, I mean, certainly you can hit me via email, we can run it through JLA, hit me on Twitter, I mean, there's about a million ways, so certainly happy to answer any other questions that might be out there, and I think that's probably it then.
So, from Michael, the question is, I see disparate system integration as an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so obviously disparate systems integration has been a problem within IT for a long time, mostly been driven by the fact that either M&A activity or you have different business units that are all doing their own thing. IT has had enough trouble with that to begin with, and it's only going to get worse as we move into this state of an ecosystem and start really recognizing that you've got all these pieces working together. And by the way, this is the opportunity, I think. It's going to become much, much more critical. And so I think one of the main roles of what's left of the IT organization as this happens will be to serve as that integrator. Now, I think part of this is technology. Part of it is going to be the technology integration. Part of it's going to be the people integration. It's about building these coalitions through this ecosystem of suppliers and vendors and even within the different silos of the IT organization to bring people together. I mean, I think that to some degree the winners in the IT organization going forward are going to be the peacemakers, if you will. the people that are able to form these coalitions, bring people together to solve problems, and to understand how value is flowing through the system. Because I think that the biggest challenge we have with integration is we tend to focus on the technology integration of it, and there's definitely going to be issues with that. But the biggest issue is that a lot of times we spend time on elements of the integration that are not that important from a business perspective. So if we understand the business value first, then we can right-size our efforts and make sure we're spending our time and energies on the right things. And going all the way back to the skills and the traits, as consultants, how do you do that? You help them learn those innovation and collaboration skills. You help build the practices and the disciplines around that. You help build these ideas of intimacy. You can help them form councils to help do some of that, and there's a lot of different strategies that can be deployed. But you need to help them build that infrastructure to bring people together, both within the organization and with their supplier ecosystem, to kind of cross that chasm.
All right, I think at this point we're very close to the extra time I put on there, so unless there's anything urgent, I think we will end this conference. As Charlie said, feel free to reach out to him on email, on Twitter, and feel free to go through Dave and JLA. Since we have a partnership with them, they can very easily contact us. Dave, I'll turn it back to you to close us out.
Great, thanks, John. Well, thanks everyone for coming. I think this has been really interesting. I think it opens our eyes to where there is a tremendous level of opportunity for consultants in doing the kind of culture change things that we do within the realms of the IT department. So we're really excited about that. Thanks a lot, and thanks for coming.
The question was, will the presentation be posted? Yes, this presentation has been recorded, and we'll make that available to all the attendees. So thank you, everyone.